Okay, so let's start with the basics. I'm Jason Paulsen. Nice to meet you. I've been flying drones for a few years now, mostly as an enthusiast and a recreational pilot. I started out with some really dinky stuff back in the day when the commercial drones were, or sorry, the private drones were still very simple. Sort of pre-Phantom, when Sharper Image, for those of us that remember that, still had a very cheap toy that you could play with indoors and outdoors. And as the industry evolved and grew, sort of my interest, and eventually I decided to get my certification. So that enables me to talk to you today, and hopefully some of what I share will be valuable for you as you are learning more about drones. And this is an introductory class today. We'll start with the very basics. We won't assume very much, and then I'll be happy to answer questions as we get to the tail end of the hour. And I'll share this presentation with you as well, because I know that had come up as a question, so I'm more than happy to do that. And there are some links here and resources that I think would be useful for anyone who's either recreational in nature, or of course, more interested in following this further and getting their FAA certification. So first things first, drones are aircraft. I know that they, share a lot of similarities with toys and model airplanes and things like that. But as far as the FAA is concerned, when you're flying one of these things, you might as well be sort of operating some kind of an aircraft. And that matters for a lot of reasons, because FAA rules the air. So they're the only, governing body, right, that oversees that. When we live in Long Island, most of us, I assume, and for those of us that live in the wider area, New York City area, it applies even more so where we have airports all around us. Personally, I live under JFK Airspace. I'm actually right on the tail end of it. But what that means is, as a recreational pilot, I'm not even allowed to fly around my house. I should not turn my drone on and launch it in the air in my backyard because I don't have air clearance. I'm in what was be known, because it's part of JFK Airspace, Class B airspace, and that's a problem. So there are apps that we can use to check things like that. I'll talk about that in a little while so we can understand where we are and what kind of airspace we're in or near. Those things are important because, again, this is an aircraft. So we have to treat it that way, just as if we were going to take off in a small plane and go for a flight. Our drones, right, have to be compliant with some rules. So I just wanted to make that point starting out, right, because when we'll hear some laws, I think, personally speaking, I didn't always agree with all of them, but it's a good thing to know what the law is, and whether or not you agree with it, it is the law. So one of the things I'm going to try to do today is to give you all a sense of what those rules are, since it's not well understood, right? All of this is so new, and even today, new laws are being drafted in municipalities and states all across our country as everyone figures out what they think drone use should look like in their area. So again, FAA does control the skies, but your local town or city or community can make rules about where you can take off and land from. So they actually rule the ground, and in that way have some control over whether or not you can fly in a given area. So that's something we also have to take into account outside of the FAA rules. What's the average distance a drone can fly from a person? You have to maintain visual line of sight. I know a lot of these drones can go really far. I mean, miles. And that's fantastic, and it's super cool. But just so you're aware, again, this is for educational purposes, and you're going to do what you're going to do. Know that if you cannot use your naked eye to see your drone, that's out of compliance with the law, and that goes for recreational pilots and professional pilots. So as a professional, I follow the same rules. I can't use binoculars or a little spotting glass to see my drone and extend my distance. I literally have to be in a place where it's visible to me in the sky from wherever it is. So those are some pretty important things to keep in mind when we're operating our drones, recreationally or however. You don't need to have a pilot's license or any special training to fly a drone, recreationally or otherwise. So just purchasing one, owning it, is enough to basically give you the right to fly it. Just keep in mind, given everything that we just talked about with some of the limitations, they're pretty severe limitations, right? So, I'll be honest, right? I have personally flown my drone in my backyard before I knew about these laws. The police did not come to my house because, no one called them. And quite frankly, a little toy drone flying in a backyard is usually not enough to start a 911 call. But we just need to understand these things so that we kind of can weigh our risks and know, how to operate safely and legally. So some things to think about. Do we have to register a drone? How about that? If I buy a drone, do I have to log that anywhere? And the answer is yes. All drones have to be registered with the FAA. There's a weight restriction. So if it's under half a pound, basically the FAA is willing to allow for that not to be registered. So there are really tiny, small drones that fall under that sort of policy. Also, I think given that it's relatively new, that half a pound regulation is about 12 months old. A lot of the manufacturers are starting to make drones specifically under that weight so that people don't have to register them. So it's going to be something that is going to be a dividing line in drones. I think from now and going forward, as we see them being released, a lot of manufacturers are trying to get under that half a pound so you don't have to register them. And that's, again, for recreational purposes. Any kind of a serious commercial drone would need to be registered regardless of its weight. So we have a website here. Again, I'll share this presentation with everyone after the meeting. But if we open this link, we can see the website for registration, which is the FAA Drone Zone, right? Obviously from the actual FAA themselves, not a third party. You have the Part 107, which is the professional pilot. So anytime you see Part 107, it's referring to a professional drone pilot. And if you're recreational, then there's a separate registration link. So two different paths for registration. And you won't be able to accidentally register for the wrong one because the professional version requires you to have your pilot's information, right, to enter. So no worries there. You won't be able to accidentally use the wrong one when you purchase your drone. Or if you have a drone and maybe after today you're planning to register it, that will be up to you. Once you register your drone, you are expected to print out labels and affix them to the aircraft and the control. So that way, if it crashes or, obviously something goes wrong, the authorities, know whose drone it is. A little scary, but at the same time, seems fair, right? So that liability can be assessed to the right places. We'll talk more about liability in a little bit, but, certainly as anything that we do out there in the real world, right? If things can be broken and people can be injured, then liability comes into play. So I think with drones, knowing one, what the laws are, really important to be, safe and not liable for anything. And two, just to understand what some of these penalties are, which we'll cover as well, so that you're aware of what the authorities do, right, when something goes wrong with drones and how they address those types of issues. So why is the operation of a drone at the scene of an accident or close to a hospital or helipad a danger to its crew or patient? I mean, basically, from what I've been saying, I think most of you already get the impression that yes, this falls way outside of what would be acceptable use. There are some situations where we've had drone pilots getting some really high fines by basically breaking some of these laws, and they're starting to be, they're growing in number, these cases. Still pretty rare, just a handful, but I know in Texas, there's a gentleman that had $85,000 in fines for misusing his drone several times around accidents and things like that. So they can be quite severe, the fines per occurrence if they think it's appropriate. They can injure people, drones, right? If they fall or if they accidentally, fly too close to someone, they have moving propellers and they can cause a gash or an injury. So the drone itself, right, it's a flying object. It has a certain amount of weight and momentum, and it can potentially harm someone. So again, going back to that liability piece, right, that's very important to consider. And technically, we're not permitted to fly over people, although we could potentially pass over people quickly, as in you're on a flight route and you're flying in a direction. It would be okay technically to fly over people as long as you weren't circling, crisscrossing back and forth, or otherwise creating a situation where it could be argued you're flying over them. for more than what's necessary to just cross and continue in a path. Recreational flying, right? Because that's, I think, what most of us are doing today, and what we're learning about. Here in Long Island, there is the ability to fly anywhere where there's Class G airspace. And of course, you're probably thinking to yourself, what is that and where is that? So I think the easiest way to think about it is it's airspace that's not controlled, it's not regulated, right? It's not part of an airport or a military area or a national park or other places where there are special rules for flying. And so in Class G, which is not anywhere near JFK Airport or MacArthur Airport or Republic Airport, because those are all airports, you can go into these apps, Kitty Hawk, and I'll show you those in a little while. We'll have a list of apps to look at, but there are these apps you can put on your mobile phone. You can very easily check where you are, and it will tell you about the airspace that you're in. So that way you can verify if you're in this Class G airspace. Again, keeping in mind, right, that there's also the local municipality you're in, so your town. You may want to find out if there's any special rules in your town. If you're in a park or something that's owned by your town, they may have rules about flying a drone. You may not be allowed, or there may be some kind of a permit that you need, but it might be worth calling the town hall if you plan on taking your drone out to the park and having a flight, at the very least, and you don't have to sort of, give yourself away. You could just ask some informational questions and get some information about what they prefer to do or don't do. And I don't be surprised if in many cases they don't really have an answer, but it's probably worth your time to find out, right? Because then when you're flying your drone, you're very comfortable and you know what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And then, of course, when we look at the county, right, there's also laws there as well for Suffolk and Nassau. Nassau less so. Suffolk has a lot of laws around their parks. They want some registration fees. I think in some cases it's only like $40 or something like that. But check with Suffolk if you're in the local parks. There are some registration fees that they ask for, officially speaking. Now, of course, between you and me, wink, wink, we're just friends here. You have to be caught for these fines to be assessed. People have to know the rules. They have to know you're doing something wrong. And quite frankly, this is also new, right? And people don't really have a lot of education around this. So don't be surprised if you see someone doing something they shouldn't be doing and no one's bothering them. I think right now it's a little bit of the Wild West. But again, my intent today is to make you educated and to put you in the position to make judgments from a place of knowledge. So that way you can weigh your own risks out there in the Wild West. New York City, right? For those of you that like to go to the city, it's a great place for photography, right? Aerial or otherwise. It's extremely limited. They have a website and it basically says there's no flying in New York City for any drones. And it's just on a website. And quite frankly, the whole drone community is very aware of this, and they're testing it frequently because the FAA will allow you to fly. They will give a authorization for someone to fly a drone in New York City. So that's in direct opposition to that website. And quite frankly, the FAA has a very simple position, which is we rule the sky. So they're not interested in New York City law, and New York City has no interest in the FAA, and they feel that it's their own municipality. So quite frankly, it's a really confusing situation. Most likely we'll see some court cases. Someone will challenge it eventually, but I don't know if you want to be that person. In the meantime, they do have specific areas where recreational flyers can fly in New York City, and I've listed them here. Flushing Meadows Park, there's a flying field there. Calvert Vaux Park, did I pronounce that right? I hope I did. Anyway, Senator Spino Memorial Park, La Tournette Park Model Airfield, and Tanner Park. Those are literally the 5 locations that you can fly in New York City without having to ask for permission. And if it's outside of those locations, which they are, as most of you probably already know, nowhere near the middle of the city, right? They're kind of adjacent to Manhattan and things like that, and they don't offer the best aerial views, a little limiting. But just so you know what those laws look like, and certainly for a recreational pilot, it's super restricted, right? Even for an FAA certified pilot, pretty much everything I said just still applies, right? And they would need some kind of special authorization from the city to fly to be completely legal. Even though the FAA would give a pass and would allow them to fly, they might still have to deal with city authorities if for some reason that became an issue. And the last thing I'll add on this topic before I retire it is that the city has instruction for anyone who sees a drone flying to call 911. So again, it requires the people in the city to be aware of this. It requires them to want to do it, but that's how the city is handling drone flight. So any questions so far? Because I know we've covered a lot of ground, and I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody behind if there's any questions that are coming to mind right now. Pretty good so far? Okay, I'll keep on trucking. Okay, so where am I not permitted to fly for recreation? We talked about this quite a bit, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. But classes B, C, and D airspace, which are all different types of airspace that relate to airports, primarily different size airports. So like the closer the letter gets to A, the bigger the airport and the airspace basically. So B is like a JFK or LaGuardia type of airspace, or maybe MacArthur Airport. C might be like a Republic Airport, and D might be something much smaller, some little airfield out there, wherever in the boondocks, so to speak. And basically, they all have different circumferences and heights that they apply to. But effectively, whenever we're in one of them as a drone operator, we need permission from the people that control that airspace to fly. And that's very important because, in today's world, they're getting more kinds of warning systems about drones, anti-drone systems. So I guess you could say airports are getting more serious about drone security. And if a plane hits a drone, if the drone hits the wing, it does some significant damage to the plane, like a small aircraft. I've seen the wing, huge hole in the wing, right, from the drone. So it's pretty serious stuff. And it can really cause an air accident. And planes always have the right of way, even if a person has permission in the airspace to fly their drone. We're always expected to be far away from the aircraft, to take emergency precautions or evasive action to avoid aircraft. There's been a situation where a helicopter was flying low and someone flew their drone over the helicopter. That person, obviously broke the law, and that was a very big deal. They went to court over that. So those are the kinds of things that, we should never do, right? Safety is the number one thing. And so, we see that there's a park rule in New York City as well. Kind of follows what we just talked about, right? There's only 5 parks we can fly in. So if it's not one of those 5, New York City has an issue with that. So those are all the do's and do nots of where we can fly. They're pretty limiting. And let's just talk about the penalties. What happens when we break any of these laws? What happens if someone gets hurt? What happens if, something gets damaged? Well, first and foremost, I'll put it out there. Good news, there's insurance for drones, like special drone insurance. You can buy policies that are kind of what we're used to for cars. You can even have an app that they offer the insurance per flight. So I think it's like $10 per hour or something like that. But effectively, there's different types of insurance if you're interested in having that level of safety and protection. And then in terms of what happens if we break any of the different regulations and laws we just looked at, again, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I just want to give everyone a fair sense of how things work. It's very rare that any of these charges get applied to anyone, and it's usually only in the most extreme and abusive situations that these things happen. So you kind of have to go out of your way to have charges pressed against you. But if someone does something really bad with a drone, they can get reckless endangerment, right? And they have reckless endangerment in the first degree and in the second degree. And so, it relates to injury, serious physical harm, flying where people are gathered, if you noticed here. So, putting your drone over crowds without any kind of, let's just say, permission, right, from the people who are facilitating an event, from the local authorities, from the FAA. And keep in mind, I've just named 3 different authorities, right, that may all have a role in authorizing your drone use. So just please keep that in mind, that it's not as simple as just the FAA. There are a number of authorities that are all involved with managing the place you fly, the air it flies over, and the larger community that it's flying in. All right, so let's look at some cheat sheet stuff. And this is, again, all reference material you'll have. I can talk about drone buying, right? Different types of drones. We'll have apps because we talked about that a little bit. And we've got a cheat sheet we can get into here where we can just look at some drone facts and talk through that a little bit. So let's just start with the cheat sheet. All right, so some things that we mentioned as we were talking about all these regulations and rules, especially the registration of the drone. Right, 55 pounds is what this represents. This 5.5 here is the maximum weight of a drone that you can fly legally with a license or without one. Anything over 0.55 or half a pound is how I described it roughly, is the minimum weight for registration. Minimum age for a person to register a drone, 13 years old, pretty young. But I think that's the good news, right? If you've got an enthusiast and they're a little younger, at 13 they can register. If it's under the age of 13 that you're allowing to have a drone, then the adult would have to register that, and the adult would have to be present when it's flown, and the adult would, of course, be fully responsible for everything that happens when the child is flying the drone, which would pretty much be the same thing with a 13-year-old as well, I imagine, except in the case of a 13-year-old, they can register it under their own name. Minimum age for someone to have a FAA license is 16. So I think everyone on this call can have a license. I can answer a few questions about that too as a follow-up. The maximum ground speed is 87 knots. Anything above that is illegal, which is rare. Most of the drones fly well under that speed. 70 miles per hour, maybe 75 is usually the higher speeds you see on the popular DJI drones and some of the similar drones. So that's usually not a limitation for most people, especially with the kinds of drones that the average consumer will buy. And so we have one drone that you're allowed to pilot at any one time. That is usually not much of an issue, but just FYI, if you had a 13-year-old flying a drone and you were flying a drone with them, then technically that would be illegal because you're supposed to be overseeing their flight. So therefore, you should not be flying with them because you're too busy managing their flight. So those are some things to keep in mind, right? There's only one pilot per drone, and that means if there's a child and an adult together, then the adult has to be managing the child's flight, not flying a drone next to the child. So again, you would have to be caught by someone would have to care enough to report that. Just know these are the rules that exist, and again, not trying to scare anybody. 400 feet, this is a very important number, is the maximum above ground level. So the reason we say above ground is because it's, there's different altitudes that we can be at. Like if you're in Denver, Colorado, you're already a mile higher than you are right now here when you're standing on the ground. So we look at the ground as the base measurement, and anything 400 feet and up, if you have authorization, you can fly at that height. If you're in Class G airspace and you're a recreational pilot, you can fly up to that height. You should not be flying higher than 400 feet for any reason. It's not allowed as a professional pilot or recreational pilot. One thing I will add is, and again, this is specific to Class G airspace, you can fly 400 feet over something that is connected to the ground. So for example, a tower, right? A piece of infrastructure that is maybe 500 feet up in the air. You would then be able to fly upwards of 400 feet over that, and that would bring you to 900 feet in the air with your drone from the ground. But we're looking at the top of that tower as where the ground starts, and think of that area as a bubble. So 400 feet distance away from it as you fly towards it is where you're allowed to achieve the 400-foot height over it. So it's a 400-foot bubble all around that object. And again, anything past that would be a breach or a violation of what's allowed. 30 minutes before sunset or sunrise is allowable flight time. So once it gets dark, there are some rules for flying. They mostly apply to Part 107, not the recreational flyer. But they recommend that you put a light on your drone to fly it at night. I think there's a recreational exception, right? If you're in these areas that allow for recreational flight, that you could fly at night with the correct lighting system, which they sell these little strobe lights that go on the drones. They blink, and so obviously it's probably more visible than the daytime, to be honest. because in the pitch black sky, to see some little strobe means that the drone is like super visible. So night in some ways offers a little more visibility to a drone pilot. The number of minutes before sunrise, we talked about that. I'll skip the critical banking angle. That's more technical in flight. 3 miles, right, is sort of your visibility distance that you need to have at least that much visibility to fly your drone. So if it were like cloudy sky conditions, foggy conditions, some other smoke condition that obscured your vision, then that would be an issue, and you shouldn't be flying the drone. Minimum distance of feet that you're supposed to fly below a cloud is 500. Shouldn't be an issue if you're only 400 feet in the air. But obviously there are some places on this earth where maybe that's more challenging, right? If you're in the mountains. So that's something to think about, but not here on Long Island. I've never seen a cloud at 500 feet. You know, there's some rules around the clouds that we can skip because they don't really apply to us. Blood alcohol level, that's important, right? This is an aircraft. We have to treat it like an aircraft with the same seriousness. So obviously, being sober is really important. We have to be sober for at least 8 hours before we fly our drone. So if you're going to the barbecue and having a couple beers, maybe you fly the drone before, not after, is sort of the way the FAA would like that to happen. And if there's an accident of any kind, you have 10 days to report it to the FAA. Anything gets damaged or broken, anything happens that, you know, is worthy of a report because there's some damage involved, and that should be reported after that. There's, you know, some penalties and liabilities because they want to know about these kinds of things. And some of these rules more apply to the professional pilots, so we won't talk about those as far as address changes and things like that. Let's see, we've got some information about operating over humans. Again, we know that we're not supposed to be flying over large gatherings of people, especially in public places. So that's the number one thing I'll leave you to take away from this. You'll have this document to review more after the class, so I'll scroll past some of this, but just know that this will be yours to review later. In-air hazards, right? So there's some things that they list here to be aware of. There's some terminology that you'll see in this documentation that I'm going to leave with you. Temporary flight restrictions. So again, in these apps that I'll recommend when we get into the next section, they give that kind of information. They tell you if there's a temporary flight restriction in your area. There's notices to airmen, NOTAMs. This is stuff that pilots actually see and use, but they also could apply to a drone pilot as well because it addresses any hazards or air conditions in the national airspace. So this is something that many of the apps that you use for your drone flight will give some information from both TFR or NOTAM. And NOTAM is a coded kind of thing. It's a little difficult to read, but I'm sure you could Google how to read a NOTAM for those of you that have never heard of this before. And more importantly, when you're in the apps, a lot of the information will be spelled out in long form, so you won't have to worry about the technical jargon. But if you're interested in learning more, and certainly for those of you that want to know more about being a professional drone pilot, these are the pieces of information that fall into the certification and are part of the curriculum and testing in order to be a drone pilot, like how to read these weather charts and these NOTAM messages that pilots also see. You know, we can talk about weather because it's relevant. It affects your flight. It affects your aircraft's performance. Whether it's hot or cold, your aircraft will perform differently in terms of how quickly it's able to respond to flight. So all things that we keep in mind as pilots. But again, I'll skip through some of this because this isn't going to be a deep class on weather and flight weather. You know, physiological conditions, right? They really urge that we're healthy and we're flying in safe conditions and that we feel good when we're flying. Skip through some of this stuff that doesn't really. So I think that's enough from this document. Again, any questions about any of this information that we shared here? It's all pretty straightforward. All right. Drone buying guide. Let's talk a little bit about the drones themselves. There are so many options out there. It's crazy. And every time I turn around, there's some new cool drone. First thing I'll call out is the technology has changed pretty rapidly in terms of the wireless signal that's used. So you'll see some of these older drones, like the one that's pictured here, the Phantom drone, pretty large and gives really smooth, good footage, but it uses a Wi-Fi technology to transmit the signal for the camera and for the controls. So the problem with that is it's limited to Wi-Fi distances, which is just a few hundred feet. So you get interference, you can't go that far. Even when you're trying to stay within your allowable areas, especially if you're in an area like Nassau County, you can get a lot of interference and it'll limit your distance even more. So they're fun to fly, they're older, and quite frankly, the technology is a little outdated for a lot of the Phantom drones that DJI was really known for and they got popular with. Then we have the DJI Maverick, same company makes this. These are pretty much the gold standard in drones for most recreational pilots and even some of the commercial pilots who aren't doing serious, Hollywood studio work, really enjoy these things. They're very easy to fly. They have a newer technology for the wireless that allows them to go anywhere from 4 to 5 miles away from the operator, from the control, and still give very clear video and be perfectly, easy to control and everything. Recommend the Mavericks. They have several different models. The Air 2 in particular is fairly small, and it offers 80 to 90% of the features that the larger Maverick offers, all at a smaller price point and in a smaller size, which can be nice when you're traveling and backpacking and vacationing. I mean, a big drone is a big piece of equipment and requires a big backpack. So small can be really good for your drone trips. Snapton S5C, it really is a very solid drone. It's why it's number 2. It's more of a trick machine. It satisfies some of the urges we have for photography, but it also does a lot more in terms of fun flying, flips, rolls, has some smart voice control. So it falls a little more into the toy category or fun for flying. Whereas when we look at something like the DJI, it's a very strong photography drone, right? It offers 4K video, which we'll see in a lot of them, but the footage is very steady. The camera quality is very good. The sensor's fantastic. So the DJI drones really have made a name for themselves as being kind of the standard because of the good mix of all those characteristics, right? In terms of being good for flight, but also very strong on the camera side. Snapton, again, strong drone is number 2, but maybe something that's more for doing really cool tricks and things like that than the photography piece. We have the Holy Stone. It's basically a good mix of some basic capabilities. It's number 3 because it's not particularly strong in any of those areas, but it's a nice, less expensive alternative, which is why it sells particularly well, right? It's listed as a budget buy. So it gives you sort of a good mix of all those things for a lower price point. The Maverick 2 is very similar to the first DJI we saw. It's a little bigger, and it's number 4 because it's a little older as well. So larger and a little more bulky. Good buy, sells really well, but not as new. The Ruco F11, never flown it. Haven't actually seen one of these things, but it's number 5, so I would trust this list. And we also have, which I don't see here, FPV drones in this list. And I'm not going to go over each one because I do want to make sure we can use the rest of this time for some questions and to cover the apps. So here we go. I just wanted to talk about the DJI FPV, which is number 10. So first person is what FPV stands for. These are drones that come with goggles. It allows you to see through the goggle as if you're in the drone. It's more lively experience than looking at your smartphone with the control. Of course, this means that you cannot see the drone, right? If you have these goggles on and you're looking out of the camera and flying around as if you're sitting on the drone, the one thing you can't literally do is also see the drone. So just in theory, right, by itself, if you were alone, you would be out of compliance and illegally flying it because you cannot see your drone physically. So I need to throw that out there. These drones are really awesome. They're great, but you would need a spotter in theory in order to be legal and compliant. Again, I'm just giving the news. You're probably going to be able to go to a lot of places right now and fly it alone, and no one's going to know anything, and you'll be fine. But if you were approached by someone and they challenged you, now you're out of compliance. So knowing is half the battle, as they say in G.I. Joe. All right, and last, let's talk about some of the apps. So this is how we know where we are, right? Where we are and where we're going. There are a lot of different apps. Your drone, whichever one you buy, will come with an app. That app will allow you to fly it, to shoot your camera, to probably adjust a lot of settings and use the automation in the drone. Drones offer a lot of automations depending on which drone it is, but everything from locking the target and spinning around it, so you get a really smooth circular, pattern of footage, to other special camera tricks like zooming away from you, so the drone will lock on you and then fly away, and it'll give that cool zoom out, zoom in effect that we see on television a lot of times when they kind of zoom into someone standing on a beach. So those kinds of things can be done with a lot of automation on the drone, especially with the DJIs. They offer all those kinds of things standard. But with these apps, we can have a whole suite of capabilities that we might not otherwise see. And some of them are things like checking, like before you fly. I'll show this one first. I think it's free on the App Store. I don't think this even costs money, and if it does, it's like $1. But basically, you can check, as you can see in these screenshots, where you are. It will give you some basic information here in color coding, and you can click on them, and you've got a map and a status, and it'll tell you whether or not you're in Class B or Class A space. You can see here there's some little icons of some planes and things, so that shows you where the airports are. I don't use before you fly, but the app I use will come up, so I'll show you that. There's nothing wrong with before you fly. I think you should download most of them, look at them, play with them, decide what you think you like the most. It's more of a question of preference than it is what's right and wrong with these apps. And some of them offer some different features, so you may end up wanting more than one of them on your device if you're flying your drone for different reasons, for different use cases you have. So we have topographical maps. This is the old chart style of the airspace. Nothing wrong with it. It's just you have to know how to read the charts. So I'm not going to call this the best tool, but it's certainly accurate and viable if you know how to read these charts. Hover, haven't used this, but I'm going to leave it here, right? You have this list in the link that I gave. And because we only have 15 minutes left, I'm going to kind of skip down to what I like, which is Kitty Hawk. Personally, I use Kitty Hawk. It's got a simple interface, unlike the cartographic maps I was showing. It's spelled out very easily, simply. It's color coded with like a very simple blue for like the areas that are JFK airspace. So if you're not in that, you're outside of it. If you get your Part 107, it's easy to request your permission to fly right here in the app. You click a button, and once you've registered and put all the information in for your pilot's information, it will let you fly with permission from the FAA. So that's all built into this app. And some of these apps also offer some advanced controls like Sun Surveyor. So you can look at the sunlight and where all that is and manage that in terms of your flight and kind of get the best light conditions, or know where you're flying in from. Verify. Here's an app that offers the insurance, right? And by the way, I'm not an insurance salesman, so I don't care which insurance you take or don't take. But I found this, I thought it was really fascinating because they offered buying insurance by the hour, right? It starts at $10 an hour. And I said to myself, well, that's cool. I might use this, because I don't always necessarily feel I need insurance for my flights. They're not all that dangerous. Litchi, right? This is a really cool piece of software that is really highly focused around the camera and helping to do a lot of post-production pieces with the camera. So I would recommend looking at this for those, really enthusiastic photography and videography fans that are looking for tools to help them to clean up their video and build waypoints into their flights, so you can pre-program where you want it to flight and film from, and that can all be preset. And that offers some really smooth footage. So I think that's another class entirely, right? How to fly well, how to fly smoothly so that you can use your gimbal. All of the controls as you're gaining or losing altitude, going left or right, and getting really smooth, contiguous footage. That's something that takes some skill and some practice. So learning how to get great photography is a whole nother level of drone flight above and beyond just getting comfortable with your flight, right? Knowing where and when you can fly. And then of course, looking at the photography aspects of flight, which I could talk about for quite some time, right? Because then we just start to get into photography. So yeah, I'll leave you with these links, right, that we have here that are all built into this presentation deck. And I'll share this with the library. So for the administration that's with us, I'll hit the share link and send it to your email addresses, or maybe even now, while we have everyone on the line, we can just put it in the chat. How about that? So I'm going to put this in the chat, this link to this presentation that we just reviewed. And so what everyone will have today is the complete presentation that includes the links that we reviewed, the drone registration links, the cheat sheet for the drone buying guide, right? The cheat sheet for the 107, so we have some of the basic facts about drone flight, and of course the list of apps. My hope today is that you're able to take this information and have a completely different understanding of what some of the limitations are, but also some of the opportunities are around drone flight. I'll close by just adding a little more information about flying your drone and using your camera footage on your drone, because this is something that I think a lot of people are learning about now as they receive some calls from the FAA. But you have a lot of people that are taking their footage, they're putting it on YouTube, and in some ways they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they're getting phone calls from the FAA. Maybe they're flying too high, maybe they've done something else that violates what we've talked about in an obvious way, and the FAA will call them and politely ask them to stop doing it. It will educate that person as to what they've done wrong, and it'll basically say stop doing that, or else in the future there would be a more difficult conversation. So those are very polite conversations. The FAA is not threatening, but just know that if you're flying in a way that's not compliant and you're putting it on YouTube or some other public place like social media, then the FAA is looking for that, and they are calling people. And I've actually watched a couple of YouTube videos of people having those conversations with the FAA. Again, they're not in tears. They're not. The FAA is not threatening them, but they're making it very clear it's an educational phone call, and it's not going to happen again. So that's a pretty serious moment for most people, and it's usually enough to prevent any further violations. When it comes to using your drone recreationally, nothing you do can be in any way commercial. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, fine, so I won't shoot real estate videos. It's actually way tougher than that. Literally anything that anybody could charge for with a drone, you're not allowed to do. So for example, if you just wanted to check out the storm gutters for your house and look at your roof, that would be a commercial use of a drone. And technically, again, someone has to call the police on you. Probably not going to happen, but technically that's illegal. So I would recommend a Part 107 license if you're thinking to yourself, there's so many things I'd like to do with my drone, so many places I'd like to fly. If you're in airspace, that's by one of these airports, I would recommend it. If you want to have a YouTube channel and you want to put some of your video out there, I would recommend it. Part 107 is only a 60-question test. There are online courses you can take in order to study for it that come with preparation examinations. I took personally, I think maybe 5 weeks or 6 weeks to study over, I'm working, I have a full-time job, so I was doing it at night, kind of following the holiday season when I got a new drone, for Christmas. And I decided that was going to be the one I was going to do, register professionally, and I was going to do this. So I set about that journey, and at night after work, put the hours in online. I think it was a $200 fee maybe for the education course, and the test is only, I think, $160. So that enabled me to become an FAA certified pilot by just passing that 60-question test. And for those of you who are interested in other aeronautics and flight and piloting, it is a section of the pilot's exam. So once you pass that, you're on your way to having the skills you need to be a pilot as well. And so it's a good portion of the testing for a pilot. So yeah, this is I think bringing us to a conclusion for our discussion today. But I really want to open the floor and encourage any questions that anyone has about anything we've talked about today, because we have a few minutes left. And yeah, I'm hoping we do have some questions.
I wanted to ask you if you're brand new to this, like you've always sort of been interested, what would you suggest on how to start?
I would recommend finding a drone that, and we could go to the list that you have here as a starting point to research them. Look at the prices, look at the features, maybe read some reviews, right? Reviews are fantastic, and decide what price point and size is right for you. Honestly, if you're in the DJI family, it's kind of hard to make a mistake. They're all really good drones. If you're going for something that might be a little less expensive, but parallel to it, definitely check out the reviews and find something that offers itself as a close parallel or competitor, or like we saw the budget buy there that was number 2. I would recommend something like that. But once you have a drone, you'll be able to practice flying it, and you'll be able to figure out whether or not you like it.
Can you practice like in a schoolyard, like when there's nobody there?
I mean, can you just?
Well, I mean,
you're below.
I would say yes, but be aware that there are some of these regulations that we were just talking about. So it might be not allowed by the school. So do it off school hours, like you're already thinking. Do it when there aren't a lot of people around. Between you and me, it's probably not going to be an issue. But just be aware that there are some, if a police officer rolled into the parking lot and asked you to stop, they would probably be within their right. You know what I mean? And you shouldn't argue with them. And it usually wouldn't escalate beyond that, I wouldn't think, right? But be aware that there are some limitations of where you can fly. And then if you went to places like the zones that we talked about where it's authorized, that are also in the presentation, then obviously you could fly without anyone bothering you, and it would be completely legal for recreational purposes, for practicing. And lastly, I'll add, there is, with most of these drones, especially the DJI, they have simulator modes where you can simulate flying. I'm not going to tell you it's a great experience, because it's not. It's kind of like you're in a blank area with nothing around you, and you can go up and down and left and right. So that's not a very good simulation, but technically you could practice that way as well. They offer that. You actually use the remote for the drone, and it all displays on the phone, and the drone is just sitting on a table somewhere, not actually doing anything. But they offer that kind of a simulation as well.
Hi. Are the regulations for flying model aircraft, like planes and helicopters, the same as drones? And also, if you're in your backyard and as long as you stay below, tree height, would you still be able to fly it legally, even if you're in an airport area?
Between you and me, legally, no. But could you do it? I would probably say like 98, 99%, it's not going to be a problem, I just wanted to be very explicit in my instructions so that everyone really knew what the parameters were. But I mean, let's be reasonable. Is a plane going to swoop into your backyard at 50 feet? I mean, you've got bigger problems on your hands if that's actually happening, you know what I mean, than your drone. So it's really not a safety issue. It's just an FAA law, you know what I mean, that unfortunately someone could make an issue out of in an extreme circumstance, right? Let's be honest about that. It's a pretty extreme circumstance when someone is bothering you about flying your drone at 30 feet in your backyard. It's technically illegal, but who's going to bother you? That's kind of my feedback on that.
Okay, and as far as the regulations between model aircraft, like model helicopters that you fly, are they about the same, or?
Yes, they are, because it's still, in airspace, right? So the AMA, or the American Model Aircraft Association, They have a whole organization and you can join. And once you join, you become eligible to fly in their airfields. There's a number of airfields that AMA only allows their members to fly from. So if you're into model aircraft, then I would encourage you to join AMA, and that would give you a list of places to fly that would not otherwise be available to you. And that also can apply to some of the drone pilots as well. Some of the airfields that we have here in New York, they want you to be a member of AMA to fly in them.
Now, do they have any drone racing, or like it have airplane races?
That's a good question. I'm sure somewhere they do. I don't know if there's a national circuit yet, but that's a good question. I actually haven't discovered that yet. For me, it's all about the photography aspect, but I think there's definitely a big DIY drone segment, people that make their own drones from scratch with and without cameras and things like that. So I would imagine some of those people also do racing.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Are there any clubs like for that beginners can sort of like join and learn?
I would look at Facebook, right? I've joined the communities around the learning online. So for me, the drone pilot online learning that I used had a Facebook page, and the person who facilitates that learning, they do a YouTube series, and there really is a bit of a community formed around that learning channel, right? And you have a lot of the people who are trying to be FAA certified, sharing stories with each other, talking about things like flying in their backyards or wherever, or frustration dealing with local authorities, trying to get permission, whatever the case may be. So there are places and pockets, but I don't think there's like a major national channel or anything like that, right? So I would say on Facebook, you probably find a few groups dedicated to drones and drone photography, probably under subgroups like bloggers, vloggers, right? They would have their own drone groups, versus people who might be into nature photography might have their own drone groups. You'll probably find it fragmented by interest.
Thank you. That was great. And actually, I've really enjoyed your presentation, just so you know. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. I know, are there any last questions I can take while we still have that last minute? I'll use all the time I can. All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for their time today. I wish you luck in your search as you're looking for your right approach to the hobby, and maybe we'll be able to offer another course in the future. I think this went really well today, so really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jason.
Yes, thank you, Jason.
Thank you,
All right,
Jason.
well, everyone have a great one. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Sure.
Be
Thank
healthy.
you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, good.
Good night, Lee. Good night, everyone. Thank you for attending. And thank you, Jason.
I'm going to shut down. Thanks a lot for the presentation, right?